All right, so we're going to talk about a couple simple tools for dealing with HTTP. So HTTP is just a protocol, which means it's basically just a form that you have to fill out. So it's a set of criteria kind of that everyone agrees on, that most everyone agrees on. And when I send a message to you, it's going to have this particular format. And that's basically all there is to it. So just like mailing a letter, it's just certain conventional expectations. Even if the mailman happens to know you and knows where you live, just can tell by your name or something like that, you still have to fill out the entire form correctly. So we'll look at some of it. So we're going to look at two tools. One of them is cURL. So this is just a command line tool, which should come on any, basically any Unix-based distribution. If not, you can download it, but you should have it on your systems. And then we'll also look at Postman, which is a GUI tool that you can download as well. So first thing, this is going to be pretty short and sweet. So cURL, this is, and then you just give it the URL. So in this case, we'll go to example.com. And we've seen this before, right? So you do a curl command, and then you get the HTML or whatever the server sends back to you. So we can do that with just curl. We can also get more detail. So almost any command line tool, it's basically conventional, where you can have a -v option, something like that, verbose. You can get more output. So this HTML document is not even close to everything that's happening when you request something from a server and a server sends you a response. This is just the very tip of the iceberg. So you can see some more of the iceberg if we do the same command. So curl whatever, and then we'll add a -v flag for verbose. So it looks the same so far. But we get a whole bunch more stuff. So this is not HTML. So the HTML starts here. We've got some more stuff going on up here. So the important sections here, there's this section, this chunk separated by a blank line. And then we have this chunk also separated by a blank line. And then we have the actual content that we want, which in this case is the HTML. So we look at this first chunk. Again, you don't need to, this is just an initial exposure. So we can see that we made a GET request. So can anyone tell me what a GET request is?
You're requesting to get the page at the end of the server.
Yeah. So are there other kinds of requests you can make?
Like a post and a update and a put.
Okay. So what does a post request do?
It also gets the page at the end, except like get, it puts the parameters in the URL, and post doesn't, it puts it in a special post parameters.
Okay, so why would you make a GET request? So under what circumstances would you make a GET request versus a post request? Anyone can answer.
Is the GET request coming from the client?
Yes, yeah. But a post request would also come from a client. So any request would come from a client to a server.
A post is when you want to include data to send to the server along with your request. Like some field you want to submit.
Yeah. So a post request, almost certainly will include some data, but you can also include data with a GET request.
Like if you're using a HTML form. then the action you would put post or actually never mind, I'm sorry, I got confused. But I think an HTML form will make a get request.
So it could, it depends on how you set it up. It could make a get request or a post request. So I'll say that the basic difference in terms of how they use a post request is going to change something on the server, right? So if you make a post request to a server, you're saying, I would like to make I would like to change your data. So that could be creating a new user, or a Facebook page, or whatever, adding a new post, or changing your account information. Any kind of change that you're making to the server is going to be handled through a post request. And you will typically send data, like the data that you want changed. For example, a get request is just, it's not going to make changes to the server, basically. So, hey, can you send me this HTML page? Or, hey, can you send me, you can make a query from a database. It's just not something that will change the database. So if you make a get request and you ask for, I'd like to get user 325's posts. I mean, you're including information in the request, and you're asking the server to do something, with the database, but the database isn't changed as a result of that. So that's the basic idea. So get request is what you do, 90% of the time. And then there's post requests, and then there's also kind of, let's say, more niche things like put, which can update, and then there's delete, which deletes, and there's actually a whole bunch more that are infrequently used. But you can, I mean, again, this is also a convention, so it depends on how your server is set up. So you could, at the end of the day, this is just text, basically. But here we're making a get request, and this is the URI. So I want to go to example.com/nothing. So that's what this is. If I went to example.com/users, then this would be get/users. And then the host, this is the base URL. This is, again, HTTP protocol. And then user agent. So this is, again, these are the headers that my client is sending. So I'm using cURL. So cURL is the client in this case. So cURL is sending a request with, and this is how it's formatted, basically. There's also other stuff happening under the surface, but at this level, my client is just sending this formatted text in this particular way. So user agent, if you make a request from a browser, you'll see that. So let's go here. So go to DevTools. Sources, network. So you can go to the network here. And let's go to example.com. We can actually examine that same information here. So we have headers, preview, response, and so on. So the headers, so I mean, this is labeled here, the response headers. So this is what the server sent back to me. We'll talk about that in a second, but request headers. So this is what my client, in this case, my client is Google Chrome. And in this case, my client is cURL. So in this case, you can see that there are more headers. So the Chrome as a client includes more information, which is not a surprise because cURL is, stripped down command line tool. So notice that my user agent is different. So the user agent is Mozilla, and so on, so on, so on. And here the user agent is cURL version 7.64. Okay. So this is the request header. So I initiated a request to this server, and my Google Chrome browser took care of all these details for me. It formatted this request. Then the server, in this case, using curl, the server sent a response. And the server says, okay, the response is 200, which means basically everything is perfect. This is what you want to get almost every time. There are other codes. There's 200 series, there's 300 series, 400. You know, we're familiar with a lot of them. So 500 is there's something wrong with the server. 400 is basically there's something wrong with you. 300 is a redirect, and 200 is some version of everything is fine.
Is this where the 404 error page not found comes from?
Yeah. So that basically means there's something wrong with you, right? So it's 400 series, which means like there's something wrong with the request that you made. So either, you know, a resource isn't found, or you're not authorized, or it could be a number of things. Okay, and then here's a bunch of headers, most of which we don't really need to worry about, but so here's text HTML. So the server in this case is saying, hey, I'm going to send you some HTML. So get ready for some HTML. And there are other things that can be sent, obviously. So JSON would be a major one that we'll be using. And then date, and there's a whole bunch of other information we don't really need to worry about. The content length. So this is the length of everything, basically. So the server, so the client knows how much data to be expecting. And then there's another line break. So again, this formatting is significant. This line break means I'm done with the headers, and here's the actual content that I'm going to send you now. And then you get all the content. So you can look here in the Chrome. So here's the response. The response should be pretty similar. So age. So again, we get content type of text HTML, and yeah, content length 648. I'm not sure why the length is shorter there. Maybe it's not counting the headers. I'm not sure. But so you'll see different, if you use different clients, you'll see slightly different things. But it all basically follows the same format. So there's curl, there's your browser, and there's also you can use Postman. So this is going to show us the same thing. So we can again, so you can download Postman. It's free if you'd like to use it. It's kind of an industry standard. It has a lot of robust features. We're just going to stick to the very basic stuff. But I can see that here are the headers that got sent by default, and this is just formatted a little bit differently. So user agent, again, so not curl or Mozilla or whatever, but Postman runtime. Probably some version of curl under the hood. I don't know. And then, okay, and then here's the response down here. You can see the response headers. You get similar kinds of things. And here's the body. You can view it, the raw content. You can kind of see what it would look like in a browser. So that's Postman. But we're not really, most of the time, you know, from the perspective of what we're doing, we're not really interested in just making a request for a web page. We're using it as an API to get some kind of data to interact with something else. So not just to get HTML. So let's take a look. Let's go to JSON placeholder. So this is, you go here, and I've installed an extension. So there are a whole bunch of, if you know, a Chrome extension or whatever browser you're using. I forget what this one is called, but yeah, JSON Viewer. JSON Viewer works well. So there are a few others if you'd like to try, but you can kind of see, especially once you start getting larger, more complex JSON, it's nice to view it in a formatted way. So this is actually pretty straightforward, but it can get very hairy. So here we are making a request to post, and this is returning JSON. So let me just make another request here. So I can see, so I went here to posts and notice that in the response header, so again, my client makes a request down here that's saying basically, I want to get some stuff. And the server says, basically, here is a bunch of preparatory stuff, and then I'm going to send you the actual content in a sec. But it's telling, the server is telling us it's not sending HTML this time, it's sending JSON, application JSON. So making requests like this in the browser is okay. It can work, but if we need to actually start making more complex requests with different parameters or authorization headers and making post requests, the browser is not really a very good tool. So you can use curl, and curl is fine, but I think Postman is probably the best tool for playing around with APIs. So here we go to copy this. So I make the request. It's a GET request because I just want information. I can see, again, I can format it in different ways, but here's the same information. Okay, not only can I make this request though, but I can also add, I can add some information. So I can add something like user ID. So I'm going to try to grab where all the user IDs is for. And you can see I added this here and it automatically populated the query. So because this is a GET request, I'm just using this query string here. So I can send this and I can see that I get all of user force posts and only user force posts. Okay. So let's try. So we'll just worry about making GET requests and POST requests. So let's look at the documentation for this API. So I want to create a resource. This means changing something on the server. So this is just a dummy application, so it's not really going to do anything, but it will give us a similar kind of response. So here's the fetch API, which we're familiar with. And we've only made so far GET requests using fetch. So fetch GET request, you just pass in the URL and it's by default, it's a GET request. There's a second optional parameter you can pass in, which is called options, which is an object that's got other stuff in it. So you can tell it the method in this case will be a post. So post request. And in the body, here's some information that you want to send it, and then any kind of headers that you would like to include. So so in order to mock create a new request is like adding a new post. adding a new, not post, like a story or whatever, adding a new story to your Facebook profile or whatever. You'll make a post request, and then you'll have to pass in certain information. So if this were an HTML page, there would be a form. You'd fill out the form, and then that information would get processed, in your front end code, and then a formatted request would get sent out to your backend server. So let's take care of that. Let's make a post request. And let's make this JSON. So you can play around with this if this isn't clear, but we're basically just going to send an object, and JSON is a little bit different than JavaScript. So everything there, it's just slightly more restricted. So everything has to have quotes. So we have what? Title, body, user ID. So title. And then body. User ID. So now if we make a request here, we get a different kind of response. And this is basically confirmation that we have, in fact, added something new. So ID of 101. So this is the 101st post or whatever. So it's confusing because there's post as in the typical blog post kind of post, and then also post as in post request. So that's going to happen a lot. So I apologize. But yeah, so here the server is sending us back this information. Depending on the server, you might get different. You'll get a different kind of response. But notice that the status here, it's not just 200, but it's 201. So that's also, that's server implementation dependent. You might just get a 200 response, but 200 meaning the resource was successfully created. So that's basically all I wanted to say about that. So there are a couple tools for you to use. You make GET requests and POST requests. Are there any questions about that so far?
When you made the post request, did it add that entry to what was already there, or did it overwrite it?
Yeah, so this is just fake because this is a placeholder API, so there actually is no database. So what would actually happen in your code is that, let's say you wrote some front end. You wrote a front end application, right? So you have a form, an HTML form for create a new ad, right? So if this is like Craigslist or something, create a new ad, you fill out the form, you hit submit. When you hit submit, the code inside the JavaScript code inside your application will pull out all the information from the form and maybe clean it, or check it, perform validation, and then it'll package it up, and it will make a post request to the Craigslist server. And the Craigslist server, it will be set up to accept requests, and depending on how the request is formatted, it'll accept it and then process it in an appropriate way. And probably what it will do is make that Craigslist server will make a request to the database and save that new advertisement there. So that's the basic process. This is not actually interacting with the database, but it's, as far as your front end, as far as the response is concerned, it's as though this is the kind of response that you would get. Sorry, was there a question?
Oh, I had a question. Sorry. You had said we could use Postman or cURL to interact with JSON. Is that correct? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, so you can, yeah.
So how would you implement JSON with cURL if we're using a terminal? Do you do it? I mean, do you do it that way, or?
Yeah, so you can make a post request. So curl allows you to make all kinds of requests. Let me, the documentation. Curl actually has very good documentation.
I mean, would we do that through the terminal, like when you loaded it through the terminal, or? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, so you can, so there's an option you can do like curl -x, capital X, post, and let me copy this. So because this is just a dummy server, it'll allow us just to make a generic post request here. But here we are making an actual post request. So if I do -v, you should see in the so there's actually more information here because this is HTTPS, so this is encrypted. But let's see where the headers are. So this is some stuff that's happening before we even get to the headers. So right here is the header that my client is sending, the HTTP header that my client is sending. And it's a post request, not a GET request.
Oh, okay, because that looks different than what's in Postman.
Yeah, so part of it just depends on how it's formatted, but you can also send JSON in so here's actually an example. So it's a little tricky because you have to escape characters on the command line, but this is JSON that the server is sending back. So notice that like there's a bunch of escapes here. So it's, it's not the most user-friendly making post requests with curl, but if you want to run it in a script, it can make it easier.
And you can get the curl command from Postman if you want, right, on the code?
You should be. I don't really.
On the right, see the little code? One more. Yep. And now,
oh, cool, nice.
Yeah, so if you ever want to copy it into the terminal and already have it formatted for you.
Okay, great.
Very cool. Yeah, I didn't know that. We can see, let's see. Data raw, okay. So there's a data raw flag, but if you use just the data flag, then you have to do something else. You can also basically tell it to read from a file. So if you have a file with, depending on how complex your body is, you can also save it in a file. But you don't need to worry. I wouldn't, I wouldn't start worrying about all of these things right now. If you have occasion to use the features, you can always look stuff up.
So Chad, I think I kind of lost track of what is this gonna do for us? Like, what is the purpose of it?
Great question. So for example, the team exercise we'll be doing today. So using APIs and designing and testing and making sure that they work. So for example, here's just a free API. And look at that, you get a nice formatted curl request. So another reason that I'm showing you curl is one, it's ubiquitous. So it's basically anything should have curl. And you'll see it in documentation for APIs. So you can paste that in and we get a response here which is in JSON. So for example, if I wanted to use this API in my application, so let me just go in the browser so it'll be a little clearer initially. So I make a GET request to this endpoint and I get back this JSON object. If this were a more complex API, there would be a lot more you could do. You could make post requests, GET requests, format queries, all kinds of other stuff. So if you wanted to like test things out and make sure that you know how to use this thing and you're getting back the right information and you're parsing it correctly, then you're probably going to want to start playing around with it in Postman. So you can figure out how the API works with Postman. Once you have that figured out, then you can just take that knowledge and transfer it into code in your application.
Chad, you're going to need to assign me to a group who understands what you're saying, because I am utterly befuddled.
Yeah, okay.
I understand what you're saying, I guess, but I guess I don't understand what. I guess the best way to describe it would be we're using these API. Maybe I'm not the best to understand this. So we're going to use the APIs to put data into a mock-up JavaScript program and then manipulate the data like we would, like we developed it. I'm just really, I don't know, somewhere like I understand all the JSON stuff you talked about, but I don't
So
know.
let's say,
Is it possible we could do a group project today?
yeah,
That's a suggestion.
that's what we're gonna do.
I mean, a class project. We could do this as a class. That's what I meant by a group project. Is that's a suggestion?
We're gonna do a hyper competitive cutthroat team building exercise. So you guys are gonna have to use some APIs to build an application. So one example would be, let's say I go to some website and they have a little like icon in the top right corner that tells me the weather for Chicago, the current weather. So how do they know what the weather is? I mean, did they hard code that into their application? No, that they didn't. So that information is being fetched dynamically. So they are almost certainly using a third-party API. Maybe they built something themselves, but when you go to whatever page and you see that little weather information in the top right corner, they are in their front end code, they're making a request to some other API, some other third-party server. They're saying, hey, I just read this guy's IP address, so I know he lives in Chicago, and I want the weather for Chicago. So something like www.weather.com / weather, and then question mark for a query parameter, location equals Chicago, format equals JSON or something like that. So I'll make a GET request. That server will send me a response, almost certainly in JSON, which will look something like this probably. It will have, like city, area code, time zone, wind temperature, whatever else information. And then my front end code will parse through that response. And let's say I only care about the temperature. It just pulls out the temperature and then puts that into an HTML element. Is that more or less clear?
Yeah, now it makes complete sense. Okay, I was just confused. Now I understand what you want to do.
So API is a very general term. There are third-party APIs, which there are a million of them. Like Google has, I don't know how many APIs Google actually has, probably like thousands. There's all kinds. So I have a very half-assedly curated list of very easy and free APIs that you can use. It's basically just in the context of web development, an API is just a website I can go to request JSON from. And then you can use that information in your own application. And then when you get, so these are all very simple and easy APIs, but when you start getting more complicated, you actually have an entire application that's built around this architecture called REST framework, a REST framework. So you can interact with an entire application. You can create resources, you can delete resources, you can change things, you can change configuration. There's all kinds of things you can do just by making requests to a server.
And when you make a post request instead of a get request, you're still receiving something back from the server. And that's what Postman is showing you.
Yeah, so I mean, again, so all of this stuff is conventional. So there's not like strictly, I mean, you could write your own server that didn't respond to post requests. You could just accept the post request and then, you know, make it the change on your database and just stay silent about it. But, you know, of course, that doesn't really happen. You'll almost always get some kind of response, whether it's a 200 okay or 201 or, you know, a small JSON object that says success, or it could be any number of things. So there's a lot of variation, but you'll get some kind of confirmation.
So what we were seeing in curl, we weren't just seeing the JSON that came back from the GET request. We're also seeing the HTML of the whole page, but that really wasn't what we're getting back from the API. We're just getting the JSON from the API.
Right. So So again, that initial curl request, just going to example.com, which is just a web page, it's not really an API. You can see that, where is that? The content type is text HTML. So this is what you're going to get when you go to your typical web page. Like, I want to look at a web page. If you're using something as an API, as like a source of data, then it's almost always going to be, you're almost always going to be dealing with JSON. There are other formats like XML and stuff, but it's mostly JSON. And here it's telling me, the server is telling me that it's going to send me JSON.
So there's basically two different types of, I mean, there's the JSON and then there's the HTML sites.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more than that, but those are the two.
For our purposes today, yeah. And so then I'm a little bit just confused or clarifying the GET request and the POST request.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I know how that would work with JSON. I keep saying JSON like the name. But for an HTML site, you could get all the HTML. But would you not post to a HTML site then? Or I guess you'd still could be.
So the way that would work is you would make an initial GET request, right, to let's say a blog site. So I go to, blogger.com and I want to log in. So I initially go to blogger.com. So I basically make a GET request and I get back an HTML page that says, welcome to blogger.com. Would you like to log in? And then when I actually fill out the form and log in and I hit submit, I'm almost certainly going to be making a post request. So that form will be a post request, but my initial request to the page will have been a GET request.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? So this is, once you do this a couple times, you'll see that it's not that complicated. I mean, the basic idea is not complicated. The hard part is accounting for all of the variation. Different APIs do things slightly differently. So it's just, it can be kind of tedious figuring out exactly how to format your request and parse the response.
Is it true that like if it's a good API, they'll have documentation that should give you most of this information, but you're kind of either double checking that documentation to exactly see what you're getting back, or if it's not a great API, it doesn't have good documentation, this is kind of how you can get under the hood and see what you need, what you're going to get back.
Yeah. So documentation is always, kind of a wild card. Some Some services have very good documentation, some have very bad documentation, some is okay. Some of it, assumes that you know how that you know certain things. So, but yeah, it's always good to double check. So that's why something like using Postman is good. You can specifically make, okay, I want, in my code, I want to make this exact request, and I want to, what is the exact response that I'm going to get? So you know how to handle it. All right.